Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina, and my guest today comes to us from New Zealand, Rita Baker from Flaxworx. Hi, Rita.
Hey, how are you?
Well, lovely to have you. Finally, you after COVID, and you hopefully feeling all better. And I'm glad you're okay.
Thank you for that. Thanks for the postponement. So
originally, you came from Germany, right?
Right. Yep.
Did you start weaving, like we're doing fiber arts back then, like in Germany?
No, I didn't. Although I have a great grandfather who apparently was quite a proficient basket weaver, willow weaver, and made large baskets for vegetable gardens and things like that. So I never met the man. So I only found that out a couple of years ago. So I've never had an artistic streak, not that I know of. I've asked my parents and they said not really. I have a streak of attention to detail though, and that comes in handy when you work in fiber arts. Yeah.
Well, you did. You also dabbled in archaeology, right?
I do, yeah. Again, attention to detail.
Right. But do you think that might have something to do with your interest in weaving?
Yes and no. I've always had an interest in history since as a child. Even in school, we've had a wonderful teacher in school. In history, we had a subject in school called history, and he made it so interesting and alive that you just love history. You just want to know more. And then my grandfather and my father both also love anything historic, to know historic buildings, that sort of thing. If you look at human evolution, and every so often in archaeological discoveries they find baskets and evidence of weaving and textiles, and so it does kind of merge, and I look at it and I can tell, I think I can tell what the person might have thought making it 5,000 years ago. And so in that regard, yes, it does sort of intermingle a little bit.
Oh, when did it start for you? Like, when did you first became interested in it?
It started when I moved here 18, 19 years ago, and I lived near an art gallery in Auckland, on North Island, and I walked past it, and in the window there was a wall art piece, a woven piece of wall art, and I walked in and I said, "Oh, I like this one. How much?" And she said, "Oh, no, that's already sold, but I can ask the artist to make another one for you to your specifications." And so I commissioned a piece of art. Well, I had no idea what commissioning work is all about, and I just, I like the color and I like this and that and the other. And 6 weeks later, I got it, and I had it in my first apartment in Auckland for years, and it traveled with me. And I always wanted to know how the person did it, because I just couldn't work it out. If you're a total novice in the weaving world, and you just stand in front of something and you just wonder, how the hell did they do this? And a couple of weeks later, a friend or a colleague actually signed up for some Te Reo Maori classes for evening school. So that's the indigenous language of Maori here in New Zealand. And my then not yet husband is Maori, and so I thought it would be a good idea to sign up as well. And while I was signing up, I saw other evening classes, and they had a mahi Raranga weaving, New Zealand Maori weaving class, as well as an evening class, and so I signed up to that. And the first night we made something is called a kono. It's a small square basket. Realized something like this, and I loved it so much, so I knew I wanted to learn more. And that evening class was only 6 weeks, and the tutor from that class is now one of my best friends, and she encouraged me to carry on with it, and so I did.
Well, when I first met you through Grant Mahi, who is
right.
a good friend of mine. Love this guy. He's one of my favorite New Zealanders. And Grant has been a guest of my channel. He was actually one of the very first people I interviewed. One first few episodes. And one of the things that I saw him do was making these plates out of flax. So that's how like my attention was caught. And then he was doing some videos of how he processes it and how he cuts it with the shell. And it just looks so involved. Like the process is not easy. Like if you go from start to finish, it's like a long and complicated process. How long did it take you to feel like you know what you're doing? Like you because right now, like you doing tutorials, you teach people how to do it. Like how long was that process until you finally like something clicked and you thought, you know what, I know how to do it?
Tricky, very tricky question. Good question though. That's a very good question. I don't know. I signed up for it was a full-time class for a whole year. So every day of the week. And between the finish of the evening class and the start of the full-time class was Christmas and New Year period and school holidays in New Zealand. So there was about an 8-week period where I just intensified what I've learned during the evening class. And so by the time I started the full-time day class, so to speak, I was already quite good in terms of processing the raw material, the fiber, because everything starts with the plant. And unlike other areas in the world where you buy your materials in, we actually make our materials. It grows. So we take care of the plant and then harvest according to traditional practices, and it's called tikanga, and process it and so on and so forth. And this plant, to know it intimately, especially the ones that you harvest from, because there's 100 or 50 different varieties of the same plant. They are good for different uses. I think it took me well over 2 years after that. And that's not the only plant we're using. We're using other native plants as well, and then it's a learning curve for those. The main thing what I'm using at the moment, what I'm making at the moment is for skirts. They're called pew, and you just see them in the picture behind me. That's what I've done yesterday. And so basically that's a totally different process to what you use for bags and little containers, and it's a different plant again, even though it's also New Zealand flax, but they're specific for their fiber content. So that probably took even longer.
Like when you do that, right, you sort of can't help but feel like you're part of the earth and part of the culture and part of the local tribe, right? All this history behind it. Because like the shell, like when I see you take that shell and scrape the flax with it, it's like, it's almost, you feel like you're being brought back in history, back in time. Like you have to feel like this is how it's been done hundreds and thousands of years ago. Do you always get this like goosebumps from like working with it? Like, is it always on your mind that like you are part of the history?
Every single day. And you never stop learning either. I've just moved to a new area here in New Zealand. So I've moved from the far north to the deep south, so to speak, from the subtropical north to almost Antarctica in my mind. And it's really cold down here. And so now I've got to get used to a complete new set of plants. And down here, they're very different. Even though it's in theory the same plant, it's not. And just the other day, I went for a drive and cut from different places, reserves and so on, before I approach council or landowners to ask for permission to harvest. And it sticks to me, and I'm going, that this is what the people who first came here had to do as well. So they had to figure this out for themselves, that this plant is good for this purpose, to make clothing and baskets. And not just here, they had to figure that one out thousands of years ago in other parts of the world as well. So the ingenuity of people to work these, and the skill, and then it hands down from one generation to the next. It's amazing. So I feel very privileged, very.
Well, I want to ask you a question that's related, but not really. So you in New Zealand for close to 19 years now, and you're doing art that was like part of the indigenous culture of New Zealand. Have you ever felt like an outsider? Like, how was this whole immigration and integration into the New Zealand culture for you?
Very good question. Very, very sensitive question too. So 90% of the time, and the people, or actually 95%, they've been extremely welcoming, happy to share, happy for me to share, because the more people know and learn, the more this culture stays alive. So that's the view of both my, or three of my tutors, and most of my friends in the weaving world. Most of my friends in the weaving world are Maori. So, and my family, I have no other family in New Zealand. So basically all my family is Maori as well. But there are those, both in the weaving world and outside of it, who, for whatever reason, feel threatened by me, or any white person or non-Maori person who practices and, worst of all, teaches this art. So you have to be very, very careful, very respectful, and I am, or I believe I am. And there are certain things I want, certain lines I want crossed. Like I do. What I teach online are add-ons, so they're not classes per se. So I really encourage people to learn at their local marae, at their local meeting place, or from local Maori people. And if they are stuck for something or need a refresher, then they can come to me, so that they get the basics laid down by Maori, because there's a lot of tikanga involved, a lot of traditional rules and so on and so forth, and they vary greatly from region to region. And even the names for certain techniques and plants vary within the country, depending where you go, what tribe it is, and so on. And I can't possibly know them all. And so that's the fine line I'm dreading. But the majority of people are super happy that I'm doing this, and they tell me more or less daily. My tutors, they're super happy. They both always say, well, I'm glad you do it, because I can't do the camera thing. I'm not comfortable in front of a camera, so I'm glad you do it.
Right.
Also, there is a little bit of my German side in it, as in because this is a business. Like when I make these skirts, and I have help with that. I have two wonderful helpers who help me with these on a regular basis. And so there is the German perception that Germans are reliable. So when I get a large order from mostly schools, they come to me on purpose because I'm German. That's not to say that Maori aren't reliable,
Right.
but that's just, it seems to be, well, because, like she's German. So I don't know why, but that's you know, even though my helpers and my husband are Maori who also help with these, but it's just for them, it's more like, because I'm the face and I have a certain attention to detail also when it comes to the whole business side of things that nobody really wants to deal with. You know, you've got to do accounting and your quoting and you know, I'm the one who does it. So
well, let's talk about the business side of it. At what point did you decide to turn it into business? Because like at the beginning you studying it. When did you decide that you were good enough to start selling it? Or like what prompted you to start selling it?
My husband. I finished the course after 1 year, and it's basically finishing with a certificate in traditional and contemporary Maori weaving, and so that's a year full-time class. And I was finished with it, and then at the end of it, he says, "You're not going to go back to an office job, are you?" I said, "Well, you know, got to earn some money." And he goes, "No, we make it work. I work the normal job, and you do this." And so, and there was never a question. It was a learning curve because of, you know, I never wanted to be in business. I never wanted to be self-employed. I always felt it is easier just to go to your job in the morning and, you know, earn a living, you know. But the downside of that is you always have someone above you who tells you what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And if you're self-employed, especially in an artistic kind of field, you can do whatever you like within reason. And so I'm fairly early, I think I finished the class in early December and the business started 1st of January.
Well, how was it like at the very beginning? Like, was it easy for you to get your first customers? Was it easy for you to find those orders?
No. Well, yes and no. So the first thing I did was at that time, which was unusual, I created a website. I built it myself. There were building blocks. In those days, it was fairly basic things, you know. So I fairly early created a website, and just with a landing page and phone number and a couple of photos of my works that I created during the year. And I also got myself business cards printed and came up with a name. And that's decidedly English name, not a Maori name, because I am Pākehā, I'm white. So I've mulled it over. And also with a fellow student from class, we went to markets. So we had a market each week where we were selling woven goods to mostly tourists at the time. And that wasn't running very well. I must admit, that was just horrible. There's just no market for it for tourists because of I don't know why. They don't appreciate it, put it that way. And also I was still working part-time as the night manager for a backpackers hostel. So just up the road to earn some money, you know, the more traditional way. But the important bit was the website, and a name. That was really important. And also I rang was our tax department, and they sent someone to me and explained to me what I had to do in order to be in business, which was really helpful. So I registered with them from day one, whereas most weavers, at least here in New Zealand, sort of do it as a hobby and sell the odd thing on the side and don't actually get registered with the Inland Revenue Department. But I did from day one. And then the other thing, I got myself an accountant. And he was, and that's my number one tip I tell all my students, if they want to go into business, get yourself a name, an accountant, and a website or Facebook page these days. Facebook didn't exist in those days. To at least just the one page. That's how you get your name out. And the accountant was the one who said, well, in order to be in business, you needed to invest first in your course that you paid for and in your raw materials, or, you know, like your office, things like that. You can all claim that on the tax. So the first 6 years, I didn't pay any tax.
Right.
That's the misconception a lot of people here in New Zealand at least do, that if you're self-employed, you pay a lot of tax. not when you start out and you have a good accountant, because you claim it back against your expenses. And so basically all the tax that I paid in my part-time job, I got back at the end of the year, because that was sort of moved into one.
Well, when you like, we talk about business now, right? Like this was the beginning of it. When we talk about your business now, how much time do you spend weaving versus all the business side of it? Marketing.
Not enough. That's the downside of business. If you want to stay on top, it depends. I set aside one day a week where I just do admin work, where I just sit on the computer and do my accounts and quotes and possibly social media posts, that sort of thing. If I see something that is really, really interesting and needs to go out right away, then I do that early morning, like now. I get up fairly early. I'm very disciplined when it comes to my work. I normally get up between 4 and 5 each morning, do some admin, and start actual work by 7. And but tools down latest 6 o'clock. So I do it 10, 12-hour days sometimes,
right,
depending.
I mean, is there like a favorite part of that for you? And what, like, if you could hire somebody to deal with one thing, what would it be?
No, really, no. I mean, sometimes I say I wish I had a PA, but just to deal with the quotes and the invoices and things like that. But then again, that would be giving away a lot of trust as well, because you're dealing with sensitive information. I haven't looked into the whole privacy of it, because there's client information as well that you need to be dealing with. So I don't, at the moment, I wish my husband would be more glued up onto computers, because that is the one person who lives with me, and is trusted. So, if he could take over the admin side of things, that would help me. But then again, doing that also gives me the opportunity to interact with customers and clients and other weavers, which I would lose otherwise. So it has its upsides as well.
Well, and when you run it as a business,
yeah,
there's basically like certain things that you might want to do as an artist that doesn't make sense to invest your time in, because it's like more involved, right? And then there are certain things that might take less time, but they would sell. How do you decide for yourself, like, where is that businesswoman bordering with the artist? Like, how much do you allow your artist self surface?
So the business side is right behind me. That is those scoops. So that is basically about 75% of my income. And the other 25%, that is the artistic side of things. And that's when I either get commissions, or when I just feel one morning and I've got, let's say I haven't got no fresh harakeke flax at home to do this, and it's raining and I can't go harvesting, or for whatever reason. And then I look at the fibers that I have in the house, and I just create. And sometimes it takes a day, sometimes it takes a week, sometimes it takes many weeks, depending on what it is. And on some of these pieces, you can't put a price on it, because you just go with the flow, and I go where the fibers take me. And sometimes, I give most of those, actually, I give away to people who appreciate the amount of time and skill and the idea that goes into it. And sometimes I get commissioned to do something, and then I talk with the client and they want something, and I actually tell them, I said, look, like, I can't do exactly as you want it, because I got to put some of myself into it, and whatever comes out at the other end is what you get. But it will be authentic, and it will be a one-off piece. And those are the most beautiful things that and I don't make enough of it, unfortunately, because the cost of living is increasing. So unfortunately, the artistic side of things goes a little bit to the sideway. But I have to make 2 commissions in the next couple of weeks, so I'll be getting into my creative self again.
Well, when you talk about like gifting your creations to people, are there people who in your mind not weave worthy? Like we have this among the knitters, we have the knit worthy people and those who are not. Who in your mind is worthy of your gift?
I have a saying. I don't know where I don't know where I picked it up from, but it's a very good one. It's not for you to ask, it's for me to give. So if someone is asking, and I've had this happen a number of times, usually it's either family members or people who come to the house and go, oh, I like this, can I have this? No, they're not getting it. But if I see someone who really appreciates art as itself, not necessarily mine in general, or someone who's been doing or giving me something out of the good of their heart because they feel like it and because they just want to help or they just want to do something good, they are the ones who will receive, and they're usually very appreciative. They go, oh my God, I wasn't expecting anything and this sort of thing. And I have people who, or family members even, or distant family members who would order something and say, oh, but I wish I could afford this, but and I'm happy to pay for it, but I just want this for someone else because for whatever reason. And then I usually slip in something extra. And they're absolutely blown away, and they just love that. And the look on the faces of people when they receive something that or when there's fundraisers. We have a lot of fundraisers here in New Zealand, especially for families or people who lost everything. And I've been in the same situation. I mean, I've had my house burned down 3 years ago, and people were giving me things out of the good of their heart, and because I really needed it at the time. I had nothing left but the clothes on my back. And so when I see something like that happen to other people, even to total strangers, I'm happy to support that. So I give pieces of my art to someone to auction it off, for example, or things like that, or I sell it, and then I put something up on my Facebook page and say, hey, anybody wants this, so the proceeds can go to such and such cause. So that is actually really, really rewarding. So that's behind me is business, but the artistic side more and more becomes more almost like I wouldn't say charity, but a gifting kind of side of things.
Well, before we started the interview, I asked you if you had any regrets leaving Germany and moving to New Zealand, and you told me that like you just came back from home and you realized that your New Zealand was in your heart and you were like very happy there. Do you ever question like how your life would be if your husband didn't push you into pursuing weaving as a business?
I do all the time. Actually, I question it all the time when I was, not so much the weaving, but when I was growing up, because I grew up behind the Iron Curtain. So I grew up in East Germany. So when it was still under communist rule, and I question if I did why I didn't follow the party rule in school. So I was not allowed to sit my A-levels and go to university. I wanted to be an archaeologist. So there we come to my love of archaeology. And so I became a gardener instead, followed in the family tradition. So having a market garden, growing vegetables, that sort of thing. And then when East Germany, was integrated with the West, a lot of businesses like my parents, unfortunately, had to close because people just didn't want to buy the East German vegetables anymore. So I had to retrain. So I retrained in tourism for 2 years. I went to boarding school in West Germany and trained in tourism. and still couldn't find a job at the time. And it's absolutely frustrating for someone like me who always, even as I wouldn't say I was a child worker, God knows, but my parents always said, no, you don't just get pocket money, you got to work for it. Okay. So, in the garden, and that taught me a lot. I've never had a day where I didn't work. It just doesn't occur to me. And so I think that's when it all started. I couldn't find a job in tourism, even though I spent 2 years learning. And then I went and I got a small inheritance from a distant aunt, a cousin of my grandfather's who passed away. And I used that money and traveled to Australia as a backpacker. And at the time, there were actually no visas for, now you have backpacker visas for Australia and New Zealand. At that time, that didn't exist. So I applied for one at the embassy in London. And purely because I wanted to learn English. So I arrived in Sydney with hardly any English in my vocabulary and figured I can't survive there. And so I traveled to Queensland to do fruit picking because you don't need much English for that. And that's where I started learning the language, but also going back to my roots and working with nature and in agriculture and that sort of thing. And when I came back to Germany after a year and a half, I wrote 10 job applications in tourism, got them all, could have picked, and went with a wholesaler who was specialized in Australia and New Zealand travel. And so that's how I ended up with my New Zealand connection. They sent me here after a couple of years working, and I always had a deep love for this country ever since my first day I came here, and as a tourist before I finally moved. So I don't know.
I noticed like you also even though like you do a lot of things with New Zealand roots, you also keep your German roots going, and you have a YouTube channel. Well, you have 2 YouTube channels that I know of, and one of them is for cooking, and it's German-based cooking. Yeah. So I was watching you actually make the Christmas cake, right? It's, yes. And then it was so interesting to watch you make it. And then I had to go and like look into the whole history of Dresden and making that cake for Christmas, and like all the bazaars that they have for Christmas markets and stuff. How do you feel like you in between the chairs? Do you feel like you always in 2 worlds?
Yeah, I never stop. I'm a photographer as well. So there you go. I always have this feeling when I get up in the morning, I can't sleep in. I never have. My husband is frustrated as hell because he works mostly nights. He's a barkeeper, he's a bar manager, so he works mostly nights. So it's a very strange kind of relationship in a lot of ways, but it works for us. And there's not a day where I wake up and say, oh, no, I'm not doing anything today. If there is no weaving to be done, or then I do some baking, or I love my German cooking. I was just recently in Germany for my grandmother's 100th birthday, and it's my grandmother's recipes that I'm showing on that YouTube channel actually. And yesterday morning, I looked out the window, still dark, and I could see the planetary alignment of our 4 most visible planets in the solar system. And so instead of doing admin work or doing weaving or cooking, I went out with my camera and took photos of the planets. So I don't think I will ever stand still. I get that from my parents and my grandparents. And I mean, my mum is 75 this year in a couple of weeks, and she still works. And I don't think I will ever retire. But concentrating on just one thing is also not in my nature. I like to, I call it, I wear many hats. I try to do that. I don't know. I just love things.
Well, what was the decision to start a YouTube channel? Like, it's not like you didn't have enough to do with your business. Like, why did you decide to go into YouTube?
So at the time, YouTube was fairly new. And I was part of a project here in New Zealand to make baby bassinets out of flax for to prevent sudden infant death. And there was a Maori-led initiative started on the East Cape of the North Island, and the one of the initiators was Dr. T.P. Leach, and I was interested in that, and he sent out an invitation. It must have been the second year after I started weaving, or it might have even been the first, I can't remember. And they were running a workshop at a marae over there in winter, I remember that, how to make one of those, I can't even show it in the camera, they're fairly large, baby bassinets called Wahakura. And so I went there, drove all the way from Auckland. It's a 6-hour drive to get there. And then for some reason, they do things differently there. They weave outside. And as I mentioned, it was winter, and weaving outside in a whole new environment, it really, I struggled, I must admit. So my first Wahakura wasn't really that good. Plus the instructions at the time weren't as clear as I would have hoped for someone who's never made one. And so I went back home, and as I do, as any weaver probably does, you learn something, it's not perfect, so you do it again, you do it again, and you do it again until you think you're perfect. And so I figured out a way, and that's my technical thinking, attention to detail, where each strip of flax goes on the item. And then I worked out that they told us they need to be extra long. No, they don't. Not all of them. Some of them need to be extra long, but some of them need to be fairly short. And so I worked out the mathematics behind it. So how many short, how many medium, how many long, going in which direction. And I've made a lot of them with that sort of technique, mathematics behind it. And then my original tutor actually said, your way is so much better than, there's no waste, and you're actually using everything, and it's much straighter, and can you show me how to do this? And so I showed her, and then I showed another person, and then I said, well, so many people are asking, but they're at the other end of the country. How about I make a video? Right. And put it on YouTube so they can watch it in their own time. And that's how it started. And so my husband filmed at the time, and it was done in our living room. And it's not perfect by any means. You just start out somehow and try and work it out. And back then, YouTube only allowed 15-minute videos at a time. And so I had to do 3 different videos of 15 minutes, I think it was. I've since combined them into one. And you know what? There are people to this day who come up to me and say, I learned how to make this from your video. And I'm rather chuffed about that. I'm thinking, this is really nice. And that started me off. Then someone says, oh, but your way of doing this and this is so much different to my way. Can you do the same for that? And that's how it started.
Right. Well, you also show like a lot of videos of the animals of New Zealand and wildlife. Is that also a passion of yours?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, where I used to live, we had kiwi, the bird, the flightless bird. I would, some people meditate, I go for walks on my own in the dark. Absolutely love it. Well, I go during the daylight as well, but I haven't got time. So I used to go early morning, get up early and walk up the hill. There was a hill behind the house in Russell. And 9 out of 10 times I would spot a kiwi. And the house we lived in for the last 3 years there was on the coast. And so I would see dolphins or whales or orca. So I filmed them. So it's, for me, it's that the animals and the photography is almost like a meditation for me. That's not a job, that's a hobby, that's something I'm passionate about. Plus, all you learn a lot about those animals as well while you observe them in their natural environment. So I could spend 20 minutes watching a kiwi just doing its thing, just standing there in the dark, possibly with a red light torch, and just looking at them and go, okay, yep, okay. And you get to know them. You get to know their little quirks. There were two just down the road from us, and I could watch them. Or we had another flightless bird around our house called Weka, and they would bring their young. Yeah, they were so trusting. They trusted me with their young. They trusted me to get close to them, to give them water for bathing, and it's you just got to be. I think you need to be in sync with nature in a lot of ways if you work with nature, and harvesting flax is the most natural thing in the world. So and to get to know nature means also you can protect it.
Right.
So,
well, you mentioned it, like all these walks and observing and even working with flax as like part of meditation. Is there something about this business that stresses you out?
Timelines. Yeah. The weather, actually. The weather is the usual reason. So we're very dependent on weather for harvesting and for preparing and drying in particular. And if you have weeks on end of rain or cold weather in winter, even though it doesn't get as cold here as it does in other parts of the world, but still, that means that possible deadlines will have to be shifted. And deadlines in my book mean money. So I only get paid when I finish a commission or an order. And because I have two helpers for the larger orders, I still got to pay them for their help, even if I have no money coming in. So that's every so often, not very often, but every so often that stresses me out. And the other time is Christmas, New Year, because that is school holidays here. So even if I finish an order, I can't send the invoice and I don't get paid. So I need to budget for that. So I need to basically, before the school holidays here in New Zealand, I need to finish a couple of big orders, ideally, to get some money in to see me right for the next 8 weeks. So I basically have hardly any income over that time. And that, it does stress me out a little bit. And every so often, possibly someone who sort of trolls me online, and that happens. If you put yourself out there, that's what happens. So you got to live with it.
Well, what's your favorite thing about social media?
Connecting with other like-minded people. That's the big one. Yeah, I've met some wonderful people online, and then later on in real life, or the other way around. I mean, Grant is one of those. He's been following me for a number of years, and we've been communicating, and he's one of my students. And only just recently, when I moved to this area where I'm in now, I actually got to meet him because he lives only an hour away from me.
Right.
So, you already have this connection, and then you meet the person, and you seem, it's like you met an old friend. And yeah, that's the beauty about social media. Yeah, I love that.
Do you think your husband ever regretted pushing you into the self-employed direction? Like, does he ever complain?
No. He absolutely loves it. He's one of those people. He's the first to share my social media posts. Apart from he helps me as well, and with harvesting and with finishing touches, and he keeps my back free. And it's almost like a reversal in roles sometimes. So if like how in many families to this day, it's tradition that the female does most of the housework, for example. For us, it's actually most of the time he does it, because he knows I have a deadline. and I need to finish something, and he goes, no, I'll cook dinner, or I do the dishes, or things like that. So it's really, no, I don't think he ever, and his family, they're all so proud of me. I mean, that's the beauty, having a large family, a Maori family, who really has your back. Right. And that's what helps me in this fine line environment of working, having a foot in both worlds, I call it. So I'm white on one side, but I have the support of my Maori family on the other hand. And if I set a foot wrong, they're the first to tell me too. If I make a mistake by accident because I didn't know, my mother-in-law will tell me. And I love it, and I love it a bit. And my sisters-in-law, they're just absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, absolutely love them.
Well, it's like really warms my heart to know that you feel so loved and included in the new to you country, and that you found your life there, and you keeping the traditions going, because I feel like it's very important, regardless of your background, to embrace the life and the culture of like where you are, your new country and your new home, and to keep it alive. And I think you're doing that wonderfully.
It's a respect thing too. You can't go to another country and expect them to follow your rules. It doesn't work like that. And plus, my passion for history as well is playing into that. I mean, Maori have been wronged in so many, well, all indigenous cultures around the world, really. They've been through colonization, and to this day they're still getting wronged in many ways. And I can see this as someone who's got both feet in this sort of world.
Well, I think you're doing a wonderful job, and I'm really glad that Grant introduced us. I loved getting to know you, and I'm so grateful that you agreed to be on my channel, a guest of my channel today.
For inviting me.